'Tis the season, folks. Fa la 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 la. Tonight, we've been featuring an exposition regarding the reason for the season, the birth of our Lord Jesus Christ. Our ministry is unique regarding this subject, for we have things to contribute which no other ministry has. There are also some unique facts brought out by other ministries, which we can add to our insights. So I thought it appropriate to take a break from our class on the Book of Hebrews and cover this subject. Well, no, wait, actually, it was friend Minetti that had the good sense to suggest this, and then I concurred. We've heard from him tonight already. We've heard from Rene Fretz, too, regarding his original research on the celestial prelude to the birth of Jesus Christ. So we see that God certainly did celebrate the birth of his Son with spiritual fireworks, and real ones too, in the census realm with the astronomy. But there also were prior celestial announcements that were the prelude to the final fusillade. So we had the supernova in the head of the child that drew attention to the era. Then we had the triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in 7 BC. And then we had the final fireworks of that other triple conjunction in 3 and 2 BC. So that's where we have come. Wise men have been fascinated with this subject for millennia. My father was a wise man too, a scientist of his time. Therefore, this subject has been a pursuit of my family for decades. We are all teachers, Mom and Dad, my 2 sisters, and my 2 brothers. We're all teachers. My father was a self-taught scientist, a naturalist who specialized in ornithology and local plants and animals, but he also was an amateur astronomer who had become interested in the subject from earning the Boy Scout Astronomy Merit Badge. He remained active in scouting as he grew up and became a scoutmaster. And one of the things that he'd often do at Boy Scout camp-out evening campfires was to point out the constellations in the night sky and the prominent stars. And he'd always begin with the Big Dipper in the north, and then would draw imaginary lines from the stars in the dipper or the handle of the Big Dipper in order to locate other constellations and work across the sky in that fashion, using those stars to make imaginary lines from constellation to constellation. And he'd do that and point out Orion and Cassiopeia. He would talk to us about the stars like Arcturus and Vega and Sirius and Betelgeuse. And us scouts would strain our eyes to try to distinguish the colors of those stars. Yellow for Arcturus, red for Betelgeuse, blue for Sirius. He also hosted thousands of elementary school assemblies across the Midwest, speaking about nature and ecology, and he showed pictures of local animals and birds, and then accompanied those with bird imitations. He even did a school assembly at my wife's elementary school. She remembers it. But anyway, he could do 200 species of birds and do that so accurately, it even fooled the birds into thinking that he was one of them. And when they heard him, they would come closer and check him out. He was also on radio shows beginning in 1930 because of his radio voice and because he could whistle bird imitations. Later, he had his own radio show and became a TV announcer. When I was young, he hosted one of the first televised shows in America about nature from 1947 through 1957. It was called Nature Trails, and it was broadcast on WSPD-TV, Channel 13 in Toledo, Ohio. I still have, in one of my files, one of his TV show scripts from 1955, in which the subject was regarding the possible candidates for the Star of Bethlehem. When I grew up, I also embraced the sciences and ultimately took up my father's quest to search for and tell others about that star. Back at that time in the 1950s, astronomers, naturalists, and wonders like my father thought that the only possible planetary conjunction which could constitute the Star of Bethlehem was that set of conjunctions in 7 and 6 BC between Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Pisces. The astronomer Kepler had proposed that in the 1700s. At that time, no other set of constellations was a candidate because of the accepted date of a lunar eclipse that was at the time of Herod, that was mentioned by the first century historian Josephus. While I was in college pursuing organic chemistry and the sciences, I got involved with a Bible research fellowship that changed my life, and my interests radically changed. The research aspects appealed to me because of my scientific background, and our family, we lived research. We went out on field trips all the time. So as a researcher, I became a specialist in biblical research. Because of this, I was invited to attend a biblical astronomy research symposium in January 1976, where we discussed all the aspects of those very same conjunctions in 7 BC discussed by my father on his TV show. It was for a series of magazine articles that were coming out. But at that point in the symposium, I was dissatisfied with how Kepler's scenario fit the Bible timeline. Rene even mentioned that in his presentation, that there's two groups. Some think that the Christmas star was that set of conjunctions by Kepler, and another group says no, it was too early. Well, I was in the other group saying it was too early, and I became the main antagonist that debated the information that was presented by the presenter at the conference, because I thought that Kepler's conjunctions were too early, because we knew the year that Christ was crucified, and 7 and 6 BC was too early because it would not fit with Jesus being about 30 in Luke 3 when he began his ministry. However, after we talked everything through, we had nothing better to go on at that time. So I acquiesced, and the main speaker published the articles that featured the 7 and 6 BC conjunctions. There were some other tantalizing conjunctions that Renee mentioned between Jupiter and Venus in 3 and 2 BC with the constellation Leo in the background. But at that time, we thought, and everybody else thought, there was a problem, because the Jewish historian Josephus mentioned that lunar eclipse that occurred close to the time of Herod's death. And in his history, Josephus mentioned a whole sequence of events around Herod's death, because the Jews hated Herod so much that they celebrated his death. And so Josephus gave a whole string of events, all the processions and everything that happened. And so it made a really full timeline. However, the historians could only seem to fit that timeline with a lunar eclipse that occurred in 4 BC. So that excluded the 3 and 2 BC conjunctions that we now believe that announced Jesus' birth. So anyway, later, a historian and astronomer, Dr. Ernest Martin, that Renee mentioned, reevaluated the facts presented by Josephus, and he was able to show how the events reported about Herod's death could be made to fit another eclipse, a different one, that occurred in 1 BC. His research, presented in his books, The Birth of Christ Recalculated, and his second book, The Star That Astonished the World, is the astronomical basis for what we now believe. And the book that we are familiar with, Jesus Christ, Our Promised Seed, was based on Dr. Martin's conclusions. His research opened the door to allow scholars to consider the conjunctions of 3 and 2 BC, which included celestial events that were significant enough to have caused the Magi to decide to go to Jerusalem. We now teach about a very unusual sequence of conjunctions which occurred in the constellation Leo. I go into more detail in these conjunctions in a Kindle book that I have published titled Happy Belated Birthday, Jesus. But tonight all we have time for is determining the exact day of Christ's birth, because, believe it or not, that's possible down to at least 90 minutes, and maybe even the exact moment, as some believe. In order to do that, we need to wind back our planetariums or celestial computer programs to the skies of 3 BC, when that unique set of conjunctions occurred, especially the one where Jupiter and Venus came together to form one star. That was extremely bright. The curator of the Adler Planetarium in Chicago, Illinois, says that was so unique, it has not happened since. So it was spectacular and very unique. The information regarding the birth of John the Baptist and the 6-month difference between Elizabeth and Mary's pregnancy will point out the season of Christ's birth to either be in the spring or the fall of that year. But there's a scripture in the book of Revelation which will pin it down exactly. Please turn to Revelation chapter 12 and verse 1. Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. And there appeared a great sign in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she, being with child, cried, travailing at birth, and pained to be delivered. And there appeared another wonder, a sign in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his heads. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God and his throne. This prophecy there in Revelation paints a very vivid picture. But if we look at this a different way being that it's telling us about the celestial phenomena that were visible in the sky on the night that the woman gave birth. So, in that respect, what is a woman clothed with the sun? Of the 12 constellations with the Hebrew Babylonian zodiac, which is on the ecliptic, that's the path that the sun travels through the sky, there's 12 constellations, but there's only one that is a woman. That's the constellation Virgo. There are 12 stars visible around her head, and there is only 1 month out of each year when the constellation Virgo is clothed with the sun. That is, when the sun is in Virgo every sunrise. And that occurs in late August and most of September. But there's only one evening during that about 1 month period when the moon is between her feet. And in 3 BC, that actually occurred for only about 90 minutes. It's quite momentous. It carries quite an impact. For here is scientific reproducible proof that way back in the beginning, God spun the planets to one day line up to announce the birth of his son. Long, long ago, when God made everything, he wound up his celestial alarm clock and set it so it would go off then. Oh, wow. There was only one 90-minute period in 3 BC when the sun was in the constellation Virgo and the moon was between her feet. In the Hebrew calendar that year, this occurred on Tishri the 1st, beginning right at sunset, between approximately 6:15 p.m. and moonset at about 7:45 p.m. You can wind back your celestial computer programs and see it. Tishri the 1st is the first day of the Jewish civil calendar. It's their New Year's Day that they call Rosh Hashanah. It's a day that they measure the reigns of kings by. It's a celebration day when they blow ram's horn trumpets all day, just like we set off fireworks on the 4th of July. But that year, they unknowingly were celebrating something much greater. I learned about this discovery of Dr. Ernest Martin in 1981, and I marveled, along with everyone else who had heard it because of my scientific background. Everything fit. I began teaching about it. I became a specialist in simplifying and explaining the complex principles of astronomy that were involved. I even got to see it, Revelation 12, 1 and 2, depicted at the planetarium at the Cleveland Museum of Natural History when I narrated a custom planetarium show there in January of 1996. But since 1981, I had a question, because verses 1 and 2 of Revelation 12 spoke of a sign in heaven, and that turned out to be the constellation Virgo. So, if that was true, what about the second sign that was mentioned in verse 3? There appeared another wonder in heaven, about that dragon. And I wondered about that. Wouldn't that be a constellation too? And it was of a dragon, so could that be Draco? I asked every Christian astronomer I met that question. This is before I met Rene Fretz. Nobody could give me an answer. I didn't get the answer for almost 20 years. And then one day, I asked another Christian astronomy student named Reese Watkins. He said he'd check into it. And a short while later, he emailed me back and said this was a meteor shower that emanated from one of the tail stars in Draco. Wow, a meteor shower. That fit the description perfectly. The stars of heaven and casting them to the ground. It was perfect. So that was a meteor shower. But how do we check things out like that occurred so long ago? Well, today, with our sophisticated news media and internet, you may recall every so often we hear about different meteor showers occurring. And they'll tell us what part of the sky they'll come from and what time of night is best viewing. In fact, my family and I have spent many chilly mornings away from the light pollution of our city viewing meteors. There are meteor showers named the Geminids, the Perseids, the Leonids. Meteor showers are made up of the remnants of comets that are burning up in the Earth's atmosphere. As any comet treks in from outer space and loops around the sun, it melts from the sun's radiation, and debris frozen in its ice fall away and streak out behind it, along with the water vapor and gases that makes up the tail of a comet. And then, as the Earth makes its yearly circuit around the sun, it may pass through the debris paths of these comets, which may have passed by recently or even long ago. There also are slight variations in the Earth's and the comet's orbits from year to year. So sometimes we pass through the debris streams more fully, and some years less. The best time for meteors is the year after a comet has passed. For example, the comet Tempel-Tuttle is the one that produces the Leonid meteor shower. Every year in mid-November, as the Earth passes through the debris stream left by that comet, it produces meteors, and they're moving because of the difference in speed between the comet and the Earth. These little pieces of debris hit the Earth's atmosphere at 162,000 miles per hour. That's 72 kilometers per second. And they burn up in the atmosphere. They streak out. And the Leonids streak out from the head of the lion into constellation Leo. The point from which those meteors emanate, where that debris stream was, is called the radiant, because they all emanate from that portion of the sky. And the comet Tempel-Tuttle orbits the sun every 33 years. So the year after it passes is when the Leonid meteor shower is the greatest. Back in 1833, it was the case. And the meteor shower from the Leonid, from Tempel-Tuttle, was so strong, the sky was full of thousands of meteors. People thought the world was coming to an end. You could even hear them rushing through the atmosphere. It was like a big firework continuously emanating from a point in the sky. People were terrified. In fact, many churches began after that, believe it or not. But I believe there was a similar meteor shower the night Christ was born. The radiant for that shower emanated from one of the tail stars of Draco. Most of us know the year and the date of Jesus' birth from Jesus Christ, our promised seed. That information also presented by Renee. That was based on Dr. Ernest Martin's book, The Birth of Christ Recalculated. That was published in 1980. As I explained earlier, Jesus was born Tishri the 1st, 3 BC. On our calendar, that's September 11th. That date was from the sign depicted in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1 and 2. So now that we know that date, we can check the annals of astronomy for any meteor showers that occur on or around that date in order to meet our search criteria for the biblical description. They'd have to emanate from one of the tail stars of the constellation Draco. Well, there are some meteor showers that do that have a radiant that emanates from the tail of Draco. They're called the Eta Draconids. Eta Draconis is the seventh brightest star in the constellation of Draco, and it is located in the tail. This star is easy to find in the northern sky by using a method that my father taught us in Boy Scouts at those campouts. What you do is you start from the Big Dipper. That's a constellation most of us can recognize in the north sky. And you follow the two stars that are opposite the handle, the stars that make up the Dipper. And you make a line in those two stars going north, and that will lead you to Polaris, which is the North Star. Polaris, in turn, is at the end of the Little Dipper constellation. And at the opposite end of the Little Dipper is the Dipper part. So Polaris is at the end of the handle. And so you go to the Dipper part, and if you make an imaginary line in the direction away from Polaris that line up with those two stars in the Dipper, all right, that line will lead you directly to Eta Draconis, which is the next bright star in that imaginary line. There are two meteor showers associated with Eta Draconis. One's in February, so that can't be the one we want. But the other is in September. The September meteor shower is from an ancient comet. It does not produce any visible meteors any longer. Nowadays, the remnants of that ancient meteor shower can only be discerned with a radio telescope. But it has two striking characteristics. It occurs between September 9th and 12th every year, and if it produced any visible meteors, they would be best seen in the evening. Most meteor showers are best viewed in the early morning hours, but this one is unique, best viewed in the evening. So it fits perfectly with the time that Christ was born. The constellation Draco takes in 1/3 of the northern sky. So they took 1/3 of the stars of heaven and cast them to the ground with his tail. So I believe that there was a second sign from heaven that momentous evening. It was a meteor shower that emanated from the portion of sky near the star Eta Draconis. That meteor shower has long since waned, so only a trace of it is left, but it still exists. Another significant detail to Revelation chapter 12, 3 and 4 is that it says, the dragon stood before the woman who was ready to be delivered to devour her child as soon as it was born. Well, that was happening back then because Draco appeared in the northern sky, all right, and it was depicting trying to devour the child as soon as it was born. Well, soon after Christ's birth, Herod sent his soldiers from Jerusalem, which is north of Bethlehem, and tried to kill the baby Jesus. Remember, he instructed his soldiers to murder all children 2 years old and under? But Mary, Joseph, and Jesus had escaped. The wise men had gifted them with riches that they could use to survive in Egypt. But there's even more information about these signs in the night sky that night. Do you remember that the wise men said they saw his star in the east? We learned that the word east in Greek was Anatole. But what is that in Semitic languages? The word sunrise in Hebrew is Samach. That's amazing because it's also the prophetic nickname for Jesus. He was the sprout, and the sunrise is the sprout of the sun. So there's several symbols coming together for this great wonder in heaven. There actually is a star in the constellation of Virgo named Samach. The modern name for Samach is Spica, and it is just below the ecliptic in the sheaf of grain that's held by the woman in the constellation. Some believers associate the exact moment of Christ's birth with the setting of Spica, the sprout, his nickname star. And that moment of that setting of that star would almost coincide with sunset because it's on the ecliptic. And that would be about 6:15 p.m. So if you look at Google Maps Street View of Bethlehem and turn it around and around to see all around, you'll see that there are low hills to the west of Bethlehem. That's where the sunset is, in the west. So, the time that Spica, or El Zamach, would set would be close to that time, 6:15, maybe a few minutes earlier if we take into account the actual horizon over the standard horizon. So, God did celebrate his son's birth with celestial fireworks. And we'll close with Psalms 19, talking about that very fact. Please go to Psalm 19, verse 1. Psalm 19, verse 1. The heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows his handiwork. Day unto day uttereth speech, and night unto night shows knowledge. I think the presentation that Renee gave depicts that exactly. Verse 3. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Everyone can look up into the sky and see it. Verse 4. Their line is gone out through all the earth. And some of the other work that Renee does about the celestial gospel, he draws imaginary lines between certain stars and sees how they all fit together. That's what this is. Their surveyor's line is gone throughout all the earth, and their words, they have a message to the end of the world. In them he has set a house for the sun. The house for the sun is in the zodiac constellations, which, by the way, the original zodiac told the story of redemption, the celestial gospel. And it is like verse 5, which is like a bridegroom coming out of his chamber and rejoicing as a strong man to run a race. That ain't timid, folks, is it? No, it's out there, it's brash, it's bold, it's brazen. Verse 6, his going forth is from the end of heaven, and his circuit unto the ends of it, and there's nothing hid from the heat thereof. The end of the zodiac sequence is Leo, and from the end is the beginning, which is Virgo. We are now endowed with the wise men's wisdom. But even greater than our detailed knowledge of that star Spica's setting is the truth of the day star risen in our hearts, that we believed in Jesus Christ, who was born that day, and have become saved. We rejoice in that fact and in this information, which is the greatest scientific proof for the existence of God and the truth of the Bible, because we can turn back our planetariums and our celestial computer programs and see that originally God spun the planets and bumped the comets so that one day they would produce the signs in heaven to announce the birth of his Son. Bless you, and good night.